Heritage, good morning. Especially if you're here for the first time, let me welcome you too. My name is Justin, and we love to do this together every Sunday. We're really glad that you've decided to spend this morning with us. Tons of exciting things happening today, and we love to do that together, including start a new series. As Kelsey said, it's called The Ugly Truth, and the focus is about strong feelings and even stronger relationships. We're going to be talking about a few things that I think every one of us can relate to, and you and I may very well be the same in this. I don't think, over the course of my life, that I have seen a set of years like the last two that have been so explosive in society and so corrosive to relationships. But the last 2 years have shown us how strong feelings can take a serious toll on our relationships, and they have left us with significant fractures in some of the areas of life that matter to us the most. That's going to be a key word today, fractures. Raise your hand if you've ever had a bodily fracture. Let's see how many people share the story. Look around you. Bunch of klutzes here at Heritage Church. A lot of experience with fractures. Courtney and I, Courtney's my wife, a lot of experience with fractures. One of them, I remember, came to us quite mysteriously. This is when our oldest, his name is Cooper, many of you know him, he was only about 14 months old, and Cooper was like a decent walker by that point. He was kind of known around our little family of three for dragging pots and pans out in the kitchen so that you can... Anybody want to guess? Yeah, they're going to play the drums, right? And at one point, Cooper's mood kind of changed. And he was being kind of whimpery, and he wasn't himself. And so Courtney notices everything first. Courtney noticed, and you know, she was right. It's like we don't see an injury here. There's no event that would have alarmed us or anything like that. But at the same time, it took Courtney and me a lot of work to figure out that maybe something wasn't right. And it just this discomfort thing. So finally, we didn't know what to do. So Pops takes him to the hospital, and we find out that sure enough, they tell us that he has what's called a green stick fracture as a 14-month-old. And so I got a little picture of Cooper to show you. Go, everybody, on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Oh. Anybody mind if I just leave that up all day? You probably. We still don't really know how the injury happened. We think maybe he dropped a pot on his leg. It could have been when I let him play in traffic while I was taking a nap. You never really know. You never really know with these things. 1 or 2 weeks later, Cooper was better. But the point is that the fracture explains why he couldn't put weight on that leg. And relational fractures behave the same way. When you have a relationship, think about your relationships now. Go ahead and pick one. When you have a relationship that has been compromised, microscopic breaks, it's called a fracture, can happen. It can happen. And the more you try to depend on that fractured relationship, the more agitation you feel. The discomfort sets in. It grows. The more you start to realize, I can't put weight on this relationship like I used to, right? I can't put weight on this relationship like I think I'm supposed to be able to. And yet, if you don't do something about the fracture, you're only in store for what? More pain down the road. And when you have a neglected fracture in a relationship, you are setting the both of you up for a total break. So, true or false, something must be done about the fracture before the damage goes long term, right? Well, that's what we're going to talk about this whole month, because our relationships are so important to us, and the reason we wanted to go on such an honest journey all through the month of October, all across all three of our locations at Heritage, we want to do an honest inventory of our relationships because we've seen how fractures can get worse over time. Many of us could tell stories about how we have experienced our culture becoming more divided in our perspectives and our experiences. We're divided in our passionate opinions about important things like politics, like pandemics, and the stresses of life have created a lot of fractures, and that has led to a lot of breaks in our friendships, in our marriages, in our families, in our churches. And this is what we believe. We believe that God's going to use this journey to bring a lot of healing to some much-needed healing in the relationships in this room, not to mention the relationships in our lives. Christians, the world needs to be able to look to us to know what to do when there has been a relational fracture. So I'm so glad that you're here today. And if you are a person that makes notes to yourself on what you'd be willing to pray for over and over again for a little while, make a note. Pray for our church in this series, that we'll just soak it in. We'll be able to use it. And thank you for being here. Thank you for being an inviter. And thank you for just don't miss a Sunday of this month, okay? We kick it off today. I want you to grab a Bible. If you see a loaner near you, if maybe you brought one, you'd be willing to power one on. If you're around Heritage long, you learn, or you don't have to be around Heritage long, that's what I meant to say. You don't have to be around long to know that we always look to the Bible to have relevant, practical understanding about the ugly truths in life and without sugarcoating things. And I think today you're going to see how the Bible is no stranger to relational fractures. Crack open just the very first book. There's 66 in there. The very first one is called Genesis. Why don't we start at chapter 25? I want to give you today, we're going to take a tour together of one of God's chosen families. One of his very first chosen families, a supremely foundational family in the lineage of God's unfolding story of grace on earth. And this family, man, were they a mess. And you'd be like, all right, now I can relate. This family was a mess, but we're going to make some observations. We're going to draw some wisdom from the story of essentially two guys, Jacob and Esau. And as we do this, this is where we'll end up. We are going to learn how to set a relational fracture. It'd be nice to stop them, but today we're going to talk about, okay, what happens when they happen? How do we set it so things can heal? That's where we're going to end up, okay? But we've got to do some work to get there. So leading up to that, I think it will be helpful first to note where these fractures come from, because you may have a relational fracture on your hands. And you, today, might be just as mystified as Courtney and I were with Cooper. You're like, man, I don't understand. Why is this so hard? Why is this so painful and so uncomfortable? So let's dive in, all right? Jacob and Esau aren't on the map yet. First, you got to start with their parents. Their names are Isaac and Rebekah. They are the mom and the dad, and these two meet each other in a 1,000,001 chance meeting that reveals that it was clearly God who was writing their love story. If you want to see it, all you got to do is go one chapter back in Genesis 24. It's pretty epic. It involves love at first sight. They're in the middle of a field, getting closer to each other, like eat your heart out Hallmark. Like it's just one of those moments that the Bible gives us. God put these two together. But from that point forward, use that to never forget that even matches made in heaven are going to experience plenty of stress, all right? Happens to all of us. So Isaac and Rebekah get together, they get married, and they become pregnant with twins. I'm curious, raise your hand. Do we have any twins in the room right now? Do we got 1, 2, 3, wow, 4, maybe 5, or maybe that's a shadow? I'm feeling lucky. Do we have any triplets? Do you have any quadruplets? All right, raise your hand if you ever walked into a room and somebody else was wearing the same shirt as you. There you go. Okay, you can relate. I got it. All right, so these two are twins. I have two. I'm not twins with somebody, but I have two brothers who are twins. And what you see about twins is that a set of twins can be very close, like best friends from birth, or they can be constant competitors from day one. And the latter describes Jacob and Esau. Let me show you. And what we're going to do from this point forward is we're going to list what we're going to call some fracture sources. Remember to talk about this first. Where do fractures like these come from? Where does the stress that leads to fracture come from? We're going to look at their story. We're going to get some ideas because you might be like, oh, I can see that in my own life. So listing fracture sources, source number one, unappreciated differences. This set of twins, Jacob and Esau, from day number one are going to be the constant competition variety. And listen, that was clear even before they were born. Genesis 25, I'm looking at verse 23, if you want to see it for yourself. The two children struggled with each other in her womb. And so Rebekah went to ask the Lord about it. Why is this happening to me? And the Lord told her, well, the sons in your womb, so much for a gender reveal, right? Sons, the sons in your womb will become two nations from the very beginning. They're going to be rivals. One's going to be stronger than the other. The older is going to serve the younger. That's weird. That stands out. That's prophetic. When you think about our relationships, like God has his own reasons every single time on why we are so different from each other in appearances and experiences and in our wiring. And that really sets us up to make a wrong move. We instead of like submitting to God in that and going, maybe this is on purpose. Maybe this can end up being a good thing. What we tend to do is allow those differences to grate on us, right? We allow that to be a constant source of stress in the relationship. And I just want you to know, it's a mistake in a relationship to have this mindset. Different than me must be wrong. Different than me must be wrong. But we do it all the time. Why don't you do it this way? What's different from me must be wrong. And that can add stress that leads to a fracture. So here's another source of fracture. Unappreciated differences, unrealistic expectations. Is what I mean by this is that our differences can lead us to instinctively judge other people for how they aren't living up to my expectations. You been there? We read on in the Bible, we learn that the first baby, the first boy to come out, was this is their birthday now. He's very red at birth. He's covered with thick hair like a fur coat. Wow. That'll lead you to doubt some of your choices in life. I just don't understand. So they name him Esau, which the name Esau in the Hebrew language, it's kind of a pun. It sounds a lot like the word hairy. So that's Esau. And then the other twin was born, and this is irregular. He's grasping the heel of his older brother Esau, and so they name him Jacob, which means like heel grabber, or think like conniver, which that's going to be prophetic as well. And as the boys grew up, the list of differences just continue. Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, probably a party animal. Jacob had a quiet temperament, and he preferred to stay at home. Now, do you think that such differences between two people could have led to unrealistic expectations of each other? I think so. It was probably constant. Why don't you get outside, get some vitamin D? Why don't you take your muddy hunting boots off before you come to my side of the tent? Maybe you should learn how to gut an animal like a man. Maybe you should get your hairy hairbrush off the sink once in a while. Pansy, Neanderthal, and it just goes back and forth, and it just kind of escalates from there. We have these unrealistic expectations of each other. Add stress to the relationship. Here's another one. Unhealthy influences. We don't often realize that it takes more than two to tango when it comes to assessing a fracture. The Bible says that Isaac, this is dad now, Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. That is a powerfully succinct, important note that Scripture gives us. It's a real problem. The parents are playing favorites. Never okay. This is going to become even more clear as their story continues. But assessing the source of fracture, sometimes goes back to looking at the people who raised us. If you're connected somehow to, you find out that his dad was an exploder, or her mom was a gossip, or someone was passive aggressive, or whatever it is, that can really help us understand why we behave what we behave. We always, as much as we hate to admit it, we either copy that behavior that we were raised around, or we run in so hard and fast in the opposite direction that becomes an important note as well. Unhealthy influences. Think about this when you're assessing a relational fracture. Think about this. Is there anybody who stands to gain if this person and I stay at each other? I mean, we have kids who work their parents against each other, don't we? We have friends who are just kind of hovering and planting seeds of negativity because maybe they want to be on the rebound, catch the other one on the rebound or something like that. We have bosses, we have coaches who foster a cutthroat atmosphere where there's this constant vibe of competition among the people that they lead. These are all things worth noticing. Unhealthy influences. Add to the list, unsympathetic hearts. You want to assess a fracture in a relationship. So far on the list, a lot of this stuff we're just set up for, and the stress is going to do what the stress is going to do, but once in a while, it's like totally our fault, and we were just very cold people. If you keep reading from where we are, you'll see a moment's going to come up that Jacob and Esau are known for. Basically, it goes like this. Jacob's at home, and he's making some stew. And Esau, presumably coming back from a very long hunting expedition, like not all day. I'm assuming maybe a few days or something like that. But he comes back, and he is exhausted, and he is famished. And he sees Jacob making the stew, and Esau, being an impulsive, brother, he's just like, I'm going to drop dead right now unless you give me some of that stew. He talks like the Bible says he talks like that. I worked hard to, and I don't have a voice for Jacob, so please don't. But Jacob is just, this is where Jacob's at. He uses this as an opportunity. And he says, all right, I will trade you some of my stew for your birthright. Birthright belongs to the firstborn. Important rights and privileges go with the firstborn. And Jacob said, I want your birthright, I'll give you my stew. And he's like, well, what good is it to me if I die right now? And so this is how a trade happens, and for some lentil stew, Jacob receives all the rights of the firstborn of his family, and surely Esau had to come to a day where he was like, yeah, I was kind of an idiot. But Esau is going to resent Jacob for a very long time. And you can't blame him. Why? It was because that was kind of cold. It was uncaring. It was opportunistic. It was uncompassionate. It was unhospitable. Listen, where there are people who disregard each other's vulnerabilities, and instead of finding ways to protect each other, they are okay with the other one feeling like they were used, there will always be fractures in that relationship. One more source of fracture you can probably relate to and add it to the list. It's unpredictable circumstances. And to me, this is kind of like everything on the short list that we've made, kind of all wrapped up in one, in some spontaneous combustion. Life has this way of dealing us a surprise hand, kind of a fallout that you can't predict. But here's what happens, and this is now you're about Genesis 27. And when their aged dad decides to bestow the ritualistic blessing, the blessing upon the head of the eldest, who is not the favorite of the mom and the younger son connive to get dad to put that blessing on him instead. And it works. And the Bible says from that time on, Esau hated Jacob. He hated Jacob because their father had given Jacob the blessing. And Esau began to scheme, I will soon be mourning my father's death. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. Spontaneous combustion. Like there it is. And the Bible goes on to say that their mom learned about his plot. I have no idea why. Esau sounds to me like he's the kind of guy who has just like said it out loud in front of the mirror while he's brushing his hair or something like that. But she whispers it to Jacob. And Jacob is kind of a smart guy. He thinks to himself, sticking around for my stronger, angrier, slightly more homicidal brother to see if he has an opportunity to kill me, maybe not such a good idea. And so he takes his mom's advice, and he gets out of Dodge. Unpredictable circumstances. I would not want to have been invited over for dinner that night. 4 place settings, 3 people present, and just like a whole lot of ice in the atmosphere. Unpredictable circumstances happen, and the future of a fractured relationship is this. Is that it's just waiting for the impact of a trial you didn't see coming. Something tragic headed your way. Some kind of loss, a shocking diagnosis, a secret uncovered, something we didn't see coming, and it exposes the weakness of the relationship. You learn in those moments what you actually have in the relationship, don't you? And then what's bound to happen is you realize you've got a fracture, and people start making a very important decision. They either stay in the relationship and keep experiencing pain under that stress every single time they try to put weight on the relationship, they try to lean and depend on the relationship, or they realize, I can't do this anymore. It's not worth it. I don't like how I feel. And so they stop trying. And what that looks like is that you just kind of treat the limb like it's dead. You start just going through life because you don't like the way it feels. You essentially cut that relationship off. And for Jacob and Esau, in order to avoid the first, they take the second. See that? In order to avoid the pain, they take the distance. And that leads to 15 years of estrangement. Twins. Silence. And in 15 years, they never speak to each other. They don't see each other. They don't worry about matching on Christmas. They don't send each other cards. Like all of that goes away. They live completely separate lives. Their parents lose family in their twilight years. It's just pain all around. And I think you've felt this, haven't you? You've tasted this kind of pain. Not just the kind of pain that comes from leaning on a fractured relationship, but the pain of the break. The pain of avoiding the pain. And that silence gives you a lot of days and a lot of nights to mull over how we got to where we are and think about the loss and wonder what we could have done to avoid all this. Do you want to know where the light creeps into the darkness for us, for Christians, for people who belong to God in Christ? Where is the relief from relational devastation? Where does that come in? It comes in with God's grace. God's grace is when things start to get better. God's grace is why we have hope. You and I can have tons of relational stress, many relational fractures, and we can hope for better days in our relationships. It's because of God's grace. And so what we're going to see here is we're going to continue to chase this arc, the narrative of Jacob's life, just to see how this unfolds. I promised you this earlier. We're going to jump into this now. We said we're going to learn how to set a relational fracture. So if you haven't been taking notes, maybe now's the time, because this is going to inspire some learnings for us in some areas that we all experience. And I want to give you some tips that you can try to be an agent of healing in the relationships that you have, all right? So we're just going to keep marching through the narrative. It's been 15 years. And Jacob senses what God is telling him. He senses it. God's telling him it's all making sense. It's time for him to go back home. And if you read the chapters, you see he's gone through a lot of things. But tip number 1 is this: get new perspective. If you want to see some healing where there has been a fracture, a great place to start is to get some new perspective. You and I, we wish we were more instinctive about this, but we're not. We wish we could see things not just from our point of view, but from other people's point of view. We become more informed, we become more understanding, but usually it takes us a reminder, right? We've got that age-old phrase, before you judge a man, that's right, walk a mile in his shoes. I don't think we know actually who said that for the first time, but this is what we're talking about. In fact, that quote has inspired other similar quotes, such as, before judging a man, walk a mile in his shoes. And after that, who cares? Because you're a mile away and you've got his shoes. Not the bullseye of what we're going for here, but it does have some sense to it. The tip is to get new perspective. We fail to take the time to see what the other person sees. And not only that, but to try to feel what they felt. That will breathe life into relationships. To see it through the lens of their history and their wiring. To be able to do that, listen, it takes time. It's not automatic. They're them, you're you. It takes time to bridge the gap. It takes humility to slow things down and observe and listen and imagine. Jacob has had 15 years to do that. And in Genesis 28, and Genesis 29, and Genesis 30, Genesis 31, and even Genesis 32, Jacob has had some experiences. He's had some experiences of what it's like to not be the favorite. He's had some experiences that have taught him how harsh and cold the world can be when you're a mama's boy without your mama. And in that time, Jacob has been worked. Jacob has been outwitted by his boss, who is family. Jacob has been repeatedly used by his own wives. Jacob has been bested. He's got this strange experience of being outmanned, bested by a stranger in the wilderness. He has tasted defeat. Listen, every humbling experience that we go through helps us become more aware of this thing the Bible talks about, the needs of others. Reminds me of a great verses all the way in the New Testament, Philippians 2. You might like it. I memorized it as a high schooler because I needed to so bad. It goes like this: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others as more, value others, consider others more important than yourselves, or value others as more above yourselves, not looking to your own needs or your own interests. And what's implied there is not just looking to your own needs and your own interests, but also looking to the needs and the interests of other people. You can do this, whether you were the aggressor, whether you were the victim, whether you have no clue what happened and how it went down. You can take some time. You can invest some prayer. Ask God to open your heart, open your mind. You can do some listening and try to see things the way the other person saw them. You want the relationship back? You want the fracture to heal? Try this. Get some fresh perspective. Swap perspectives with the other person. Tip number 2. You ready? Start serving again. Start serving again. The chances are, if you've had a fractured relationship, then what happened was where you guys left off is things ended and people said some choice words and then everybody took their ball and they went home. And we do that. We do that out of anger. We do that out of frustration. We do that out of fear, but only when people start giving again can it begin to feel like it's safe. We can come out now. We can all come back to the table. And the spark plug sometimes is when somebody starts serving the other person again. And you know what? I see this. I see this in Jacob's story in chapter 32. Look at this. Then Jacob sent messengers ahead. He traveled far away. He's going back. God's told him to go back. He's going back. He sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau, who was living in the region of Seir in the land of Edom, and he told them, give this message to my master Esau. Humble greetings from your servant Jacob. Sounds like Jacob's done some changing, hasn't he? Until now, I've been living with Uncle Laban. Now I own cattle and donkeys and flocks of sheep and goat and many servants and both men and women. And I have sent these messengers to you to inform you, my Lord, of my coming, hoping that you will be friendly to me. Do you see what I mean by start serving again? The hands are open. He sends that first text in 15 years. Hey, it's a familiar number, but I haven't heard from you in 15 years. And it takes a lot of vulnerability to be the first person to make the first move, doesn't it? That's called serving. We need to talk. I'm reaching out. I like when I see this, how he gives him something. He fills in some gaps. He just says, hey, just so you know, this is where I've been. He does more. He gives him some space. He says, look, I don't want to startle you. Just want you to know I am headed your way. A servant heart does that. And even more, he puts desire on the table, makes the first move and says, I'd like to see you. I mean, doesn't that Philippians verse that we just talked through start to echo from there? And specifically when it comes to not just looking to your own needs, but being aware, cognizant, maybe the first time in a long time, of the needs of other people. That is not the Jacob we knew, is it? He was a heel grabber. He was an angler. He was a taker. Some people are very good at it. It comes by instinct sometimes. But now other people's interests are as important to him as his own interests. And I'd like to give you some confidence here, is that you may think that opening yourself up to make the first move, to be the first one to practically, tangibly serve the other person or give in to the other person and do something nice for the other person, you may see that as a sign of weakness, as a sign of defeat. And I want you to know that is not necessarily true. It is quite likely that is a lie from the pit that will keep your relationship fractured forever. Even if it feels that way, don't let yourself off the hook. Look, the next verse that follows in that Philippians 2 verse says this. This is the kind of relational behavior that Jesus exhibited. Strongest guy we know. He makes the first move. He gets low. He stays humble. And he serves. That's our hero. That's what we do. If you want to see some healing, start serving again. Tip number 3, take ownership. Take ownership. Now, as noble as some, I'm kind of showing the noble side to a lot of what Jacob has done because I think we can learn from it. But I don't want to leave something out that's important to the story, is that Jacob may have very well been shrewd and protective and is afraid for his life. His heart is in his throat. He sends this message, and then sure enough, he gets a message back. He gets a message back, and he hears that Esau is now on his way to meet him. He's like, not just, I'm coming through and I just wanted you to know. He's like, oh, Esau's going to come meet you in the middle. And he's bringing 400 guys with him. We're assuming they're not carrying kazoos. That's important to know. And if I'm Jacob, I'm like, well, God, I tried. Everybody you turn. This could get hard. You know what Jacob does? He moves to the front of his entire entourage. He gets way out ahead of him. The Bible says that for the first time in 15 years, he sees his brother. His brother is coming. He locks eyes with him. The brother that he had hurt so many years before. his womb mate, as my brothers like to call each other, sees him for the very first time, and in a sacrificial move to do whatever he can to protect his wives and protect his children and protect his servants, everybody who is in his household's care. He goes way ahead of the pack and he puts himself out there, way out in the open. That's a family first move, and that is a family first before me move that is totally new for Jacob, right? And then the Bible says that he gets before Esau and he bows low before Esau once, twice, 7 times. He bows low before Esau, and he's been calling him Lord and Master. He's been calling himself servant, and all of this to me spells out this. Dude, I was wrong. I was wrong, and this is major. Something that we got to learn is that if we want to experience healing in our relationships, you must take ownership of anything you possibly can. Take ownership. It reminds me of when I was a kid. Many of you know, I grew up in a family of 6, ages all like smushed together, 6 kids, 6 years. We had this family room where that's where you could find like all the toys all over the place all the time, all the throw pillows around the floor, half completed art projects on tables, unfinished puzzles. Like that was the room. And so quite often my mom would have to get back there and get all 6 of us in there and say, I don't know who it is, but all of us are going to put it back, whatever, because I want a clean house. And so we would get in there, and all 6 of us would kind of shuffle around, and we'd do a few of the easy things. But after a few minutes, and I see this in my own house now, only after a few minutes, everybody's what? They're like, they've done the easy things. They don't want to do the hard things. And so everyone is kind of like stepping around the stuff that they don't want to touch. Just appearing busy, appearing to, appearing engaged and like, oh yeah, we're all on the plane here. I really care, and they're stepping over stuff, stepping around stuff. And that's when my mom does the thing where she grabs the box and she starts picking up the things that nobody else wants to touch and putting them in a box. And this box is going to go in the trash. No, wait, no, you can't throw that away, Why is that? Because when faced with the possibility of losing something forever, suddenly people are willing to take a little bit more ownership. It doesn't have to be yours. It doesn't have to be you that put it there. But somebody's got to do something. And this is very simple. If you don't want to lose the relationship, you take as much responsibility as you can. Think about what you said. Think about what you did. Find out how it made them feel. The Bible uses this powerful word, confession. Confession, this is a biblical plea to us that when we confess to God, when we confess to each other, that is us finally, for a change, not stepping around it anymore. I'm not going to step over, not going to pretend it's not there. I'm picking it up and I'm saying, hey, look, I behaved that this was unimportant, fake news. This is important. This has been getting in the way of where you and I need to go. And I need to call this what it is. And I need to take ownership of this. And I need to say, I'm sorry. And when people learn how to be imaginative, not false, but imaginative about anything they can take ownership of, it starts moving in the right direction. I want to ask you, can you do that this week? It does not take a party of 400 friends for you to do this. This can be a text. Hey, just want you to know, I was thinking about this the other day, and to do that over again, I wouldn't do it that way. I need you to know that I was wrong. I don't know how it made you feel, but whatever it is, use the words. And it might feel like the most random thing ever. But listen, I've been on the sending end of that text. I've been on the receiving end of that text. So much relief rushes in to a place where there used to be pain. So much warmth rushes into a relationship that started to feel cold when people are willing to take ownership. Well, something amazing happens. Back to Jacob and Esau. Something amazing happens You were hoping for it. I was hoping for it. The Bible says that when Esau saw Jacob and they got together, 400 men in tow, Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they both wept. Promise you, I got two grown men come up on the stage, start crying. We'd all be in tears. Like that's the warmth of this moment. The relational rehab has begun. We're not done, but it's begun. And that is so much better. Now, there are some things that the Bible does not give us, and we're just left to muse about them. One of the first thing that I would say that I've never mused about before this week is, was that Esau's planned response? Do you think there's any chance that Esau was walking with his hand on his sword as he got closer and closer to Jacob? I mean, come on, it's Jacob we're talking about. He doesn't know. And really, we'll never know. We just know how it ended up. Another thing we'll never know is how the conversation went from there. We don't really know if they were able to resolve everything perfectly from the last 15 and 30 years. My guess, knowing relationships, is that there were probably some things between them that they couldn't fix. They just had to settle with. They just had to sort of be okay with. But listen to me, because I think some of us really need to hear this today. There is something in life that is more important than total resolution, and it's called reconciliation. Reconciliation trumps resolution in relationships every single time. I want you to keep that in mind. Keep that in mind as we go through these last two tips. Tip number 4. If you're dealing with a relational fracture and you want to set it, you want to experience some healing, hold on to hope. Hold on to hope, plain and simple. Never forget that God alone is the God of healing. That's where healing comes from. And fractures tend to take things from us that we are never promised to get back. And if you've experienced this, then you know that from that point forward, the ball may very well be in somebody else's court. You can't force people to give you a second chance or give the relationship another chance. It might just be lost to history. And yeah, we can try some of these tips. But look, I want to encourage you, if there is one person you're going to look to, to hope for healing, someone you're going to depend on for true, genuine healing of the heart on the inside, don't look to the other person. Don't look to yourself. Put your hope in God. This is what Jacob knows. God is sending me home. And you know what happens for Jacob that quite often happens for us? Is that God will send us in a direction. He will tell us to do something, and that path that he's sending us on takes us right through a relationship that we abandoned, that we discarded, that we thought, well, at least never have to see that person again. And God will just spin us right around and take us right through it. And it could happen in the following week. It could happen 30 years later. And all Jacob knows is, this is where God is sending me. And I want you to see this, because it puts on Jacob, and it really puts on us to face the fracture. It puts on us to be an agent of healing. Check this out. Jacob prayed. This is just before he goes. O God of my grandfather Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you told me, that stands out, you told me, return to your own land and to your relatives, and you promised me, I'm going to treat you kindly, and I know this, I'm not worthy of all your unfailing love, your faithfulness you've shown me. I remember when I crossed over the river. I remember when I came here, I only had a stick in my hand, and now I've got a household. It fills 2 large camps. I've been blessed. You've been behind that. You're the God of grace, and I'm asking the God of grace, please rescue me from the hand of my brother, because I'm afraid. I'm afraid he's going to attack me. I'm afraid my wives and my children are going to have to pay the price today for something I did years and years ago. But you promised me, I will surely treat you kindly. I will multiply your descendants until they become numerous as the sand of the seashore, too many to count. So now you tell me, what do you see there? What is Jacob clinging to? Is he clinging to his ability to smooth talk his way back into his brother's good graces? Is he clinging to Esau's readiness to reunite with him? No, he's clinging to the promises of God and his trust in God's ability to lead him well. That's where you put your hope when you're trying to bring a relationship back. You just trust God for it and let him do what he's going to do. Tip number 5, exercise lots of grace. Long-term relationships, friendships, marriages will never be long-term unless you exercise lots of grace. And man, is it exercise sometimes, isn't it? You can wink at your spouse right now. That's totally okay. This is a place for honesty. Exercise lots of grace. I tell you what, there's something really subtle that Isaac told Esau back when Esau was at his most furious, where he was first realizing how ripped off he had just positioned himself for and what Jacob had done to him. There is something I've overlooked for years that I want to show you that his father whispered to him in that moment. You can find it in 27:40. He says this, "You will live by your sword." That's how it's going to go from here. You're going to serve your brother. Kind of stuck, bro. But when you decide to break free, you will shake his yoke from your neck. I can't be sure, and I want you to know that, but I can't help but think that this was looking ahead to a future day of forgiveness. Forgiveness is when we let something go that's hurting all of us. And when it comes to your relationships, the truth is you can demand justice. You can demand repayment. You can be a holdout. You can wait in hope that they might experience the same pain that you've been dealing with. You can walk away. But never forget this. There are no long-term relationships without forgiveness. I'm going to say it again. There are no long-term relationships, not for you, not for me, without forgiveness. The fracture never gets set to receive the care, and it has a chance to experience healing. And folks, this is why this is so huge for us, that we get to know God as we worship him, and as we talk to him, and as we walk with him. The lessons never cease on how full of grace his heart is. And it's this particular point, a juncture in all of our fractures, all of our relationships. We get to this point where we realize that God is not just being a God of grace to us. He's ready to be a God of grace through us. And he's not so interested for your mountain of grace to enjoy to get bigger and bigger, that it just pools up in your life, but that you become a pipeline of grace to other people who have screwed up bad and they've hurt you. But we can still have a relationship. We can move past this. Forgiving is not a behavior that you and I, it's not habitual to us. We learn it from watching a holy God who is owed everything by everybody here. He loved us so much that when we had treated him as nothing, he gave us everything by sending his perfect son, Jesus, to come and live a perfect life on earth and lay himself down and opened his hands down to the final breath, should have never come to this dirt ball that he helped make. And the people that he loves, they're here. He's like, I'm not done with these relationships. And that's why he died on the cross. He paid the penalty for the sin that you and we've racked up a sin bill that we cannot pay off. Nobody pays that. That's curtains for our relationship with God. Jesus pays the bill, makes the bridge. That's all the grace you and I will ever need. And if God can forgive you, you can forgive others. The question is, are you gonna? 15 years later in that wilderness meeting, was Esau's hand on his sword as he approached his brother? We'll never know, but I know this. He had a choice. He had a choice to keep nursing the wound and the hurt and the betrayal and the resentment, or exercise lots of grace. And after 15 years, what powerful steps were taken, choices that were made to allow the God of healing to heal the worst, most compound, complex fractures. And it's all through the power of amazing grace. The dream for your leaders here at this church is that you'll experience this grace in your life, because we have seen God move mountains. We have seen God provide healing that was never expected, relationships that were broken, relationships that were shattered, were never thought God would put that back together again. We've seen that in our relationships. I've seen that in my relationships. I've seen that in my marriage. I've seen that time and time again with people who have come forward with the worst situations. And listen, we are never promised. We give our lives to Jesus. We start following him. We are still never promised to get any of that back. But when you're dealing with a God of grace, there's bound to be a way. And if you let God lead, let him chart the course. And if we just start showing up for each other, amazing things can happen. So the first step we got to take is we got to turn our eyes to God. Can we do that together? God, we want to praise you as the God. You are the healer of the breach between every one of us. You made a way to rescue your relationship with mankind. And here we are in mankind trying to do the same thing. The ugly truth is that we have been more responsible for the fractures than we care to admit. We are more in position to bring healing than we wanted to realize. We're asking that you would give us the courage to try some new things this week that will bring healing and repair to our relationships. Father, I want to pray right now for the person who's maybe even re-experiencing the pain that they were put through, and it's the first time they've been faced with how bad that hurt. And I'm so grateful that you are a be with God. You are right next to us. You are the God of healing. Help us to heal. Give us enough health to just take the next step. You give us the best dreams for our relationships. And I want to pray for every one of us here that you just kind of nurse us through that. I want to pray for a new vision. For those of us who are willing to trust you on this, think of how in 2 Corinthians 5 you say that people who are a new creation in Christ become ambassadors of reconciliation. It's like we are heaven sent to provide hope to all relationships because of what you have done for our relationship. And we believe that the world is looking for someone who knows how to go first, someone who knows how to listen, someone who's ready to understand. Would you Let us be those people. We are not asking you to do something with us that we can do on our own. We're just making ourselves available because we agree. The world needs this. We praise you for demonstrating all the things that are possible in you. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Amen. Heritage, we love you so much. Joel and the team are going to give us an opportunity to worship. And after that, we've got some students to baptize, which is going to be amazing. It's going to get real rowdy in here. And then after that, we've got some food to eat out in the parking lot. We're going to spend some time together. And I'm so grateful that you're here for that, so we can enjoy those relationships and strengthen those relationships, because stress is coming for us too, right? And we want to build the relationships now that we want to be able to enjoy later. So I encourage you to stand. Let's open our hearts and let Joel lead us.